I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined. Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Sometimes riders feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
Hey folks, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, Dr. Richard Harden. We are on the same mission, which is waking up America. We just have different paths. So stay tuned for some information on how you can keep up with Richard and all his work.
Visit Richard's website at raharden.com. That's the World Wide Web at RAHARDIN.com. At his website, you can see a summary of the 6 books he has written, where purchases may be made. He also has a link to 18 videos on YouTube and several blogs about Christian beliefs. If you prefer, visit Amazon.com/Kindle and type in Richard Harden to see and purchase his books.
Every day, the men and women of the United States Marine Corps stand ready to defend the American way of life. The few, the proud, the Marines.
The following message contains a special offer for listeners of this station. Are you a man over 40? Are you constantly looking for the nearest bathroom? Do you wake up multiple times a night to use the bathroom? Right now, Perfect Prostate is sending out free bottles of their groundbreaking new formula to listeners of this station. Perfect Prostate Formula was developed by medical doctor Mitchell Fleischer, and its ingredients have been clinically studied to reduce your frequent nighttime bathroom visits and promote healthy urine flow. Right now, preferred customers get their first bottle of Perfect Prostate absolutely free. There's nothing to lose. Perfect Prostate is guaranteed to reduce that constant urge to use the bathroom, especially at night, and promote healthy urine flow. Don't wait. Call now for your free bottle. Just pay shipping and processing. Dial 1-800-675-0251. That's 1-800-675-0251. Supplies are limited. One free bottle per household. Call now. Dial 1-800-675-0251. That's 1-800-675-0251.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
My name is Jessie. I'm a United States Special Forces widow. This gives me a unique perspective on the world around us. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you how I see it, and I won't pull any punches. This is my POV, which stands for point of view.
All right, this is Jessie. I'm so happy to be back with you guys. And I'm not alone. Nope, I'm not alone. I've got my favorite recurring guest, Justin Kinney. How you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you are always such a welcome guest on Saturday Slowdown. I love the topics. So what fascinating topic do you have for us today?
Well, I thought today would be a good time to talk about the Middle East, and in particular how they got the borders that they do, because understanding the border situation in the Middle East actually can explain a lot of what's going on there today.
The Middle East is a very timely topic, especially with the peaceful transfer of power having just happened and all the chaos over there. Yeah, and the borders, I do think they'd be a key to figuring all this chaos out, Justin.
Oh, absolutely.
So, what country or region or what corner of the Middle East are we talking about? Because the Middle East is kind of a big general name for a lot of chaos.
It is, and it's not always used the same either. There's no standard definition. Some people throw in different states. But primarily we're going to be talking about the former Ottoman Empire, in particular kind of the western part of the Middle East. So we're talking Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Palestine. We'll touch on Israel a little bit later as well. Turkey, Lebanon, those states.
Israel has its own special history, doesn't it?
Yes, and its borders were decided in a very different manner than the rest of the Middle East.
Yeah, no kidding. And its borders are still in dispute.
It is, yeah. There's still a lot of debate over those borders.
So let's start off with somebody whose borders aren't in dispute, like Iraq, Iran. How did that come to be? It used to be all one big mass, didn't it?
It did. If you go back kind of, around the turn of the 20th century, 19th and 20th, most that area was part of the Ottoman Empire, which was a huge empire at the time, mostly Islamic in nature. It was very influential, particularly in that part of the world, but it was globally influential as well. But they had been kind of losing territory for decades at least, and losing influence kind of leading into the 20th century. And when World War I happens, the Ottomans sided with Germany, and as well with the Turks, and so they sided with Germany. And so when they lost the war, that territory was kind of given to the victors. And so the prime ministers of Britain and France and to a smaller extent Russia kind of all sat down together and decided how to divide up this territory. And so that's actually kind of how we got what we see today.
Okay, so wait a minute. The people of the region had no say in the matter.
Very little, yes. There was some influence, but for the most part, it was all of these European powers got together and decided how to divide up essentially the spoils after World War I.
So European powers, and possibly some U.S. influence maybe, I don't know, but the Western world decided how to, for lack of a term, carve up the Middle East.
Yes, and in particular, it would be Britain and France for the two big members. Okay,
I'm not sure I'd like to have another country telling me what the borders are.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when you have a country that doesn't know the history and doesn't understand all the various ethnic groups and cultures that have all lived in that area for decades, centuries.
This sounds like a recipe for the disaster of today.
It certainly has played a huge role. There's actually an agreement called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. It was kind of a secret dealing between the Brits and the French. Russia was kind of a minor party, but it essentially defined their spheres of influence and control in the entire Middle East. And so they kind of carved it up. The British got one portion, the French got one portion, the Russians got a small little bit as well. And then each of those three countries kind of divided up the borders within their area that was assigned to them because of the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Okay, so when did the Sykes-Picot Agreement happen?
Well, there's a little debate as to when it was officially made, because it was largely a secret agreement, but it really took effect almost immediately upon the end of World War I. They had basically come together during the war and said, if we win, this is what we want to do, and we'll assign territory this way. So it happened sometime during the war, but as to the exact date, I don't know that anybody really knows that.
So it would be around 1916?
Somewhere in that time period, yes.
Okay, I figure if we can at least put a year on it, it helps people kind of get a point of reference. And that's the date I've seen most of the time associated with sometime around 1916, 1917, so...
The agreement was probably actually early 1916 to the best of my ability, maybe January through March, somewhere in that time period. It would have been signed probably mid-2016, but the public didn't actually find out about it until 2017.
You mean mid-1916?
Yes, mid-1916 is when it would have been signed.
But, of course, there wasn't instant communication back in 1916, and there certainly wasn't social media, so it took a while for word to leak out, huh?
It did, and to an extent, they didn't want it to leak out at first. They intentionally kept it secret for a while because it was essentially based on the premise that they would win the war, and they didn't want to let that leak out until they actually had one.
Well, that makes sense. You don't want the potential loser to know what your diabolical plans for them are, just in case you lose.
Exactly, and at the time, it certainly wasn't a foregone conclusion that they would win. So they kind of kept this deal secret. It was kind of a what-if type agreement that eventually came to light and would have been late 1917. And that's when people started to find out about it, when they started dividing up territory.
Okay, so we had France, Britain, and with their buddy Russia deciding to pull out their great big carving knives and go, whack, I get this section. Whack, you get that section. Russia, you can have that little leftover territory over there.
That's almost exactly what it is. And the idea of carving it up is fairly accurate, too. They had a tendency to kind of just split it up in almost straight lines with no real regards for, actual ethnic, religious, tribal distinctions on the ground. They just kind of split it up very neatly almost.
Probably too neatly for the indigenous people.
Oh, absolutely. And that actually led to a lot of problems because you suddenly had all these ethnic groups that were divided across borders. And that led to a lot of problems.
And we're still seeing some of those problems, aren't we?
Absolutely. Honestly, this Sykes-Picot agreement is probably considered a major turning point in the relationship between the West and the Arab world. Even to the extent that actually a few years earlier, there was a British colonel, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head, Lawrence, I think it was, Colonel Lawrence. And he had promised the Arabs that if they helped support the British against the Ottoman Empire, then they would be given their own independence and homeland. And so I don't know if he didn't have the authority to make that or if they went back on the deal, but it essentially ended up breaking that promise or at least negating the promise. And so this kind of was a point of contention that already put the Arab world and the Western world at odds, even before things started getting divided up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the culture over in the Arab world, for lack of a term, to use your term here, isn't that one of your word is your bond and you're only as good as the last time you kept your word?
It is very much kind of a handshake culture. That yes, they hold your word very highly, and so when this promise was negated, and again, I don't know if it was officially broken or if he just didn't have the authority to make that deal, but it was seen as a broken promise in exchange for them helping the British essentially against the Ottomans.
Okay, so it was one of those paper tiger kind of promises then. You help me do this and I'll give you this shiny bauble over here, and oops, you'll never reach the bauble. It's kind of like Lucy pulling the football out from in front of Charlie Brown every time.
Oh, absolutely. And as we saw too, as they started dividing it up, these powers, increased and exerted more and more influence over the next couple decades in that area, and this ended up leading to even more opposition to the West. And And we even started to see the objectives of the Arab world changing, because after World War I, it was all about creating a stable government. But the more and more influence the West exerted, we saw it shifting away from stable government to let's kick out the colonialists. And this led to a rise of military regimes across the region.
I could see I wouldn't want some other country telling me how to live. I could see it.
Absolutely.
I mean, goodness knows I'm too strong-willed for that noise, so I can just imagine people who've just been told, no, you don't live in the Ottoman Empire anymore, you live in this made-up country.
Oh, absolutely. You're told by somebody else that you live in a country. A lot of times, they were named by the West as well. Several of the countries were given Western names.
Oh, do tell.
Well, Jordan, I think, is a great example. That's an ancient name, from religion, and it was not ever known as Jordan until the West gave it that name. Syria is another one that I don't believe was called Syria ahead of time. It was a name given to them by the West. I don't know where that name particularly came from, but they didn't even really adhere to the names that the people on the ground saw themselves as.
Okay, so not only did they basically lie to the indigenous people, they didn't even go with the local naming conventions. And then
for the most part, yeah.
Then they probably wondered why the local people hated them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Iran, that country, that's a modern term. It was never around ancient times. So it was very common for the West to just kind of step in and just exert their influence, and it led to a lot of consternation among the local people. And then to go even further, the best way they had to kick out the colonialists was through military regime, and that's why we tend to see in the Middle East a lot of military-led regimes, because they were the ones strong enough to fight back eventually.
So that's why there's more, for lack of a term, regimes and dictators over there?
I mean, there's certainly other reasons as well, but that played a very large role, because their objectives again changed from we need a stable government to we need to kick out these colonialists, and the military regimes are the ones that were most capable of doing so.
Who was controlling Iran and Iraq in that area way back when?
That would still be all under the Ottoman Empire. They were, again, very large and influential.
Which Western power chomped it up?
Okay. So essentially, that part of the Middle East was divided into a northern and a southern portion. So the British were given the southern portion. So this would have been, Jordan, kind of southern Iraq, Palestine area, kind of anywhere from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. Today's Israel, that would be the British portion as well. The French were given the kind of the northern portion, so this would be northern Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, even parts of southeast Turkey, and then Russia was given a little bit further to the north, with where we would think of Armenia, the Turkish Straits, Istanbul would have been under the Russian control, and so it was kind of divided almost more into a northern and a southern portion.
Okay, then how come Iraq is one country, not two?
That's a good question. And there was some collaboration between the French and the British as they divided these things up. It wasn't completely divided into those two, but you saw like the French had a mandate over Syria, the Syrian mandate that was all theirs. The same thing with the British mandate over Palestine, which is now Israel and Jordan. But there was some collaboration, and Iraq is one of those that kind of ended up getting put together. Although even today, we still see that northern Iraq, which would have been the French territory, is mostly distinct from southern Iraq. Because that's where the Kurds live, and they essentially rule semi-autonomously.
Right. And the Kurds are actually one of the more Western-friendly groups over there.
They are, but even they were split across 4 different states at the time: Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey.
They still are, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, they still are. I mean, they're, I believe, the largest ethnic group in the world to not have their own state, and it was largely because of the way the West carved up the Middle East that they don't have one.
I did something on this at one point. I think it's their approximately 30,000 strong without a country. It
could be. I don't know the exact number. I know they're the largest, but
yeah, it's it's horrific. I mean, I can totally understand why they want a country.
Absolutely.
I mean,
well, you even look at some of the other ethnic groups in the area, or religious groups. You have the Shia Muslims, who were split across Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, and bits of Saudi Arabia. The Alawites were split across northern Lebanon, Syria, southwest Turkey. The Druze, which is another ethnic group. They're split across Israel, Lebanon, Syria. And then you had all kinds of other minority groups: the Assyrians, the Yazidis, the Chaldeans, the Circassians. All of these groups were kind of split across borders all of a sudden. I mean, the Kurds are the most famous because they're the largest, but you have dozens of these smaller groups that also face similar situations.
Okay, so the West came in and sliced everything up, ignored the local people, and just said, this is how it's going to be. Oh, by the way, I found the audio clip I'd used on a previous show about the Kurds. Let me play it for you.
Great.
The world's 30 million Kurds, equivalent to the population of Canada, make up the largest ethnic group in existence without a recognized state of their own.
30 million.
That's a lot of people.
So, yeah, that's a lot of people to go, no, you don't have a country. You're going to be subject to 4 countries. And no wonder the Kurds always seem to, for lack of a term, get the short end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Saddam Hussein was rough on them. I mean, I remember, reading about him gassing Kurds and killing Kurds thousands at a time.
No, absolutely. It's actually interesting you mentioned Hussein because dictators like him, you could throw in Gaddafi as well. Part of the reason that they were so brutal, besides them being violent individuals anyway, is because there was this kind of push to unite the Arab world. There was this idea that carving up the states like this had diminished the Arab influence on the world. And so there was a push to unite the world. And this was often done by suppressing the differences between them, sometimes violently, like Hussein or Gaddafi did. They tried to suppress all the differences between them so that they could unite. And this obviously didn't work. Well, I guess you could say it worked temporarily. But those differences obviously came to light again. But that was one effort that was seen by several of these dictators in the Middle East to try to unite the Arab world, even post division of lines.
Now, question for you:
Sure.
When since we're talking divisions of ethnic lines and stuff like that over in this area, the Shias and the Sunnis didn't get along during the Ottoman Empire, did they?
No, they've never really gotten along. There was an element though of being united under one larger scale world. There was considered to be a caliphate at the time. That's probably the last true caliphate that the world has seen was the Ottoman Empire, or part of the Ottoman Empire anyway. So there was an element of working together, but they've never really gotten along. There's always been arguments at minimum and often violence between them.
Okay, but they kind of had you do your thing, we'll do our thing, but we'll all join together to kick the Westerners out? Kind
of, yes. I mean, the Arab world has often struggled over centuries with their identity because they've been torn between kind of religion and nationality, and even ethnic sectarianism versus kind of the industrial Western sectarianism. So we've seen this struggle with identity even long before the Ottoman Empire broke up. But once the borders were divided up even further, this identity crisis became a much bigger deal, where you had individuals who are saying, okay, well, am I Kurd or am I Iraqi or am I Muslim or am I what am I? And there was this huge identity crisis that really spawned across much of the Middle East because of the way they were split across borders. There was no good way to identify yourself. I could see this becoming a real problem, and I've also heard and read mostly from news reports surrounding the Gulf War, where we ousted Saddam Hussein, that there was no sense of nationalism. It was this, I'm loyal to my family, my tribe, my clan, and my town. Never mind the rest of them. Right. And that's, we actually tend to see that around the world too, where people tend to be more loyal to their group of people, less so than nationality. There's certainly exceptions to that. Here in the United States, obviously, we're much more nationalist based than ethnic based for the most part. But a lot of places around the world are more tied to their ethnicity than their nationality, and the Arab world in particular has struggled with this a lot.
Okay, now for those who are new to the show, I want you to back up for just a second. And can you define sectarianism and the sectarian part of it for those who are new listeners to this topic and don't have a clue what you're talking about?
Sure. Sectarianism is basically the idea that you have some sort of over-the-top or excessive attachment to a particular group of people. Usually you see this in religion, this kind of attachment to a particular sect of the religion where you get the name sectarianism. But it doesn't necessarily have to be religion. We have seen it with ethnic sectarianism. As I think I mentioned a minute ago, what I called industrial sectarianism, but that's kind of attachment to the West, or attachment to industrialization. But essentially, it's this idea that you're excessively attached to a very specific sect or party or group of society at the expense of others, usually. You'll often see people define sectarianism almost as a form of discrimination against those who are not part of your sect as well. I've actually heard people use the word bigotry to define sectarianism. I don't know that I would necessarily go that far, but it certainly can lead to that because of this way that you're so excessively attached to your group, your religion, or your sect, or your party, or whatever.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody's kind of on a level playing field here, Justin.
Oh, sure.
Because not every one of my listeners lives, eats, and breathes this stuff like we do.
24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah. Trust me. I'm the consummate news junkie, and I know you are too.
Absolutely.
Although you also combine it with history, which is why I find interviewing you so fascinating. All right, so we have all these sects now being told, oh, I don't care if you had this region before. You're now divided between Iraq and Iran, and you've just got to cope.
Yes, pretty much. We had the split. And I don't know that I would necessarily even go so far as to say that the West didn't care. Part of it is they just didn't know. You can't possibly know the cultures and the religions and where all these individual boundaries were without being there. And when somebody way over in England makes these decisions, some of it's ignorant, some of it's not caring. It's a combination of a few things, but the end result was still the same.
And there was no Wikipedia to pull up the answers.
That's absolutely right. There was no Wikipedia at the time.
And the encyclopedia probably didn't have much because it was probably one of the most popular encyclopedias at that time. What I would guess would be Encyclopedia Britannica, and it would probably have limited information.
I would think so. Yeah.
They didn't have the ability to research things like we do today.
No, they certainly did not. At least not with the speed that we can.
Right. So they made these decisions unilateral. The three countries made these decisions for the local people. Did they think they were helping the local people, or was it just dividing up the spoils of war?
It's probably a little bit of a mix. There was certainly an element to it where the British and the French saw an economic advantage to having control in this area, especially with oil, but other things as well. So there was certainly an element that it was just a selfish division of the spoils. There was, I don't want to say it was entirely selfish though, because there was this kind of belief that if they could divide up the borders from a third party perspective, then they wouldn't necessarily have to go through all the centuries of war that, let's say, Europe went through to get their borders, right? I mean, Europe's borders have essentially been decided by centuries upon centuries of fighting. And so there was this thought that, if we divide up the territory, maybe they won't have to go through all those centuries and centuries of fighting. Now, how much that played into the final borders, I don't really know, but there was at least that sentiment present.
Okay.
For all I know, that was justification for their actions rather than a real reason behind it, but that was an argument that was made at times.
Okay, I could see that perspective coming into play. So that's how we got Iran, Iraq, Jordan, and were Turkey and Syria included in that?
Yes. Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, even Saudi Arabia would fall partly under that. At least parts of Saudi Arabia would have been part of that deal. Saudi Arabia is a little bit different as it gets further away from that main crux of the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia is huge.
Yeah, actually, while we're talking about Saudi Arabia, when we say the modern Middle East, there's really only 4 states over there that have their own shared ethnicity, language, and religion for the most part. Whether it's the entire state is all shares those qualities. Iran would be one of them, being a little bit further to the west. To the east. They don't have a lot of the division that some of the others do. Saudi Arabia would be one. Turkey is largely a shared ethnicity with a little exception for the for the southeast corner, and then Israel. And none of these are particularly pure. In other words, you don't have say Germany, which is all Germans. Or you don't, the French, which are all French people. The ethnicity and the state are the same. The Middle East doesn't really have that, with those 4 possible exceptions, and even they aren't the most pure examples.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Israel. Israel didn't get its borders from Sykes-Picot, did it?
No. Israel actually, I should say Israel was actually part of the deal. It was not called Israel at the time. It was actually called Palestine. A lot of people don't know that, but the word Palestinian actually used to refer to both Jews and Arabs that lived in that area. Excuse me. So Israel was part of this deal, but at the time it was really seen as part of what became Mandate Palestine, which was ruled by the British essentially. Their borders came out very differently than did the rest of the Middle East. So, all right, well
let's move on, and we'll get back to Israel in a minute. But I just want to bring up the point that Israel it may have been part of this thing initially, but then when the country that we know today as Israel was formed, it was a whole other process.
Oh, absolutely. When I say Israel was part of the process, all I mean is the land that eventually became Israel. It was part of the deal, but it was not considered Israel. It was not called Israel. That process and the borders that define Israel all came, a couple decades later.
Okay. So how long did the West have their influence? And I'm not going to use the Palestine area or the Israel area. I'm talking about how long was it until Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Jordan before they said, get these colonials off my back. We want you out of here. How long before that happened? Are we talking...
It varies state by state, obviously. So that there's a little question on it. In general, the influence lasted a while. Syria, I believe, gained independence in 44 or 45. And the other states were all around that time period as well. So
right around the end of World War II.
Yes, for the most part, yeah. So they lasted a couple decades, but the influence obviously lasted for a while. I think the British officially pulled out of what was called Palestine, but is now Israel, Jordan, in 47 or 48, right before Israel declared their independence. So we're talking the influence lasted a few decades, for the most part.
Okay. Well, since you mentioned Israel again, why don't we discuss when Israel became a nation? And I happen to know the date Israel was founded off the top of my head. May 14th, 1948.
The day Ben Gurion officially declared independence, yeah.
Yes. So
now their history is a little different. I'm sure you know this just as well as I do. The land was obviously predominantly Jewish. We're talking first, second, third centuries. It shifted towards Christianity a little bit more when the Romans, Empire, extended their influence, and then about the 7th century, that area became much more Muslim. There was the conquest. and it pretty much remained Muslim for centuries. But you kind of in the late 19th century, so late 1800s, we started to see kind of a rise in Jewish nationalism and wanting their own state again. And after World War I, as I mentioned, when the borders were divided up in the Middle East, Mandate Palestine was formed. This was about a 30-year period of control. And once this Mandate Palestine was formed, this idea of Jewish nationalism kind of spiked even further. And this is when we started to see a lot of Jewish immigration to the area. And by the end
Jewish
of World War
term
II,
for
I think
it,
about...
by the way, is Aliyah.
Right.
Like Aliyah to Israel.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, that's exactly what was happening. And by the end of World War II, about a third of the population of that area was Jewish. And so it was largely successful. But I will say during this time period of immigration, there was some fighting. There was the occasional bout of violence. We had the Irgun pop up, which was kind of a Zionist paramilitary organization. There was some fighting on the Arab side who didn't like the Jews coming in and doing it. So it wasn't entirely peaceful, but by and large, this was a relatively peaceful thing. Both Jews and Arabs sought better living conditions in the area than you had in other parts of the Middle East. And so we saw, in particular, Jews immigrating to this part of the world, from the end of World War I, up through World War II.
Okay.
Now, okay, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, now, after World War II, there was a whole lot more Jews running to Israel. Because they wanted nothing to do with Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obviously, there were other circumstances going on in Europe. They didn't want to be around anymore. And so you saw them, in a lot of cases, fleeing. And a lot of them immigrated to Israel, among other places. Israel was obviously one of the key areas.
I mean, I know if I had to leave my home, I'd want to go somewhere where people are somewhat like me. So
sure. Yeah, I think that's something we all like. There's an element of safety in that to an extent. People who understand you and don't want to kill you, I think is important.
Exactly. In fact, what I always say is, you're welcome to have any religion you want, as long as your religion doesn't force you to try and kill me.
Yeah, I think that sounds fair.
Except, I don't care if you believe in the flying spaghetti monster. You just carry along with that as long as that doesn't mean you're trying to kill me. You just carry right along with that flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah. And so, the Jews were looking for this area, and we saw this, as I said, there's a rise in Jewish nationalism, so they were asking for it, and they were immigrating to this land. And I believe it was 1947, the UN decided they should step in and do something. And so this is when we saw, it was called the UN Special Committee on Palestine, which, it was created and it was done to examine this issue and decide what to be done about it. And of course, during this time period, Britain was already starting to withdraw a little bit from the area. The British mandate in the area was terminated. So there was kind of a little bit of a vacuum of power where they were undecided about quite what was going to happen.
Okay. So there was this power vacuum and the UN tried to step in. Now, when was the UN founded? Because the UN wasn't always around.
No, they were not. After, I'll back up a little bit. So after World War I, there was a different group that was founded. It was called the League of Nations, and it was essentially designed to do something very similar to the UN, but for a variety of reasons, it failed. And so the UN was put into place in 1945 after World War II. And when it was founded, it was obviously much smaller. I think it only had about 50 states involved, whereas now it's 193, I believe. So it was a much smaller deal, but it was only founded about 2 years before this issue cropped up.
I was going to say, I do know that Israel was the 58th member.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that, but yeah. So it was obviously a much smaller deal at the time. We've added now 140 more.
I did a little bit of my own research since I knew what we were talking about this time.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't realize they were 58.
Yep, Israel was number 58, and it took them 3 tries to apply for recognition by the United Nations.
Yes, and they obviously didn't get it the first time. They actually, we can talk a little about some of the wars that happened. The Arab-Israel War and the War for Independence and stuff. like that. But Israel didn't gain official recognition by the UN until after all of that.
Right. I mean, it was, and even then, there were, everybody wasn't for it. In fact, I'm trying to remember the vote. I'll have to look it up, but the exact details of who voted how.
Mm-hmm.
But there were countries that voted against recognizing Israel.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even to this day, I think there's still about 30 UN member states who don't recognize Israel.
Oh, there's a few. We've already named a few.
Yeah, no, almost exclusively in one part of the world. There's a few random ones elsewhere, but
yeah, Afghanistan doesn't officially recognize them. They don't have official diplomatic relations. Algeria does not accept Israeli passports. Period. End of sentence. I'm kind of going through a little bit of research stuff on the fly here. Looking for the regions we're talking about. Where's Jordan?
I believe Jordan does. They're one of the only ones in the Middle East that does, because they had a peace treaty.
Jordan does, yeah, because they signed a peace treaty. And,
yeah, that was only in the 90s, though, I believe.
Exactly. Iraq does not accept Israeli passports except for Iraq Kurdistan.
Yes, actually, as we're talking about Iraq being divided, the Kurdistan part of Iraq runs really semi-autonomously. I mean, they have their own currency, their own passports, their own border control, and so they do things almost completely, exclusively from the rest of Iraq.
Right. If Israel can become a nation, why can't Kurdistan become a nation? Why can't the Kurds finally get their own country?
It's an interesting question. I don't know that I have an exact answer to it. I do think over time the idea of state sovereignty has become more and more important to states, and even today, now we see people fighting to keep borders the same in the Middle East. I mean, even the U.S. gets involved in the Middle East to keep borders the same and not have things change. I think there's this idea that once borders are established, you don't like to change them. Israel was kind of a weird example. It's kind of very unique. I don't think that's the general rule. I think that was an oddity that doesn't fit with what usually happens.
Well, you'd mentioned Lebanon. Yes. Lebanon does not accept Israeli passports, and holders of passports containing any Israeli stamp or visa will also be refused entry.
There's actually quite a few Middle Eastern states that are like that, where if you even have the stamp in your passport, they won't let you in the country.
Well, do you know, to make it easier on people who visit Israel for whatever reason, but they're not Israeli citizens, do you know what Israel's done with their stamps? They essentially now put a glorified Post-it note into your passport, and you can take it out when you leave.
Yes, yeah, I did know that. They it's like a little extra sheet of paper that you can slide in.
Yeah, I think that's for a number of reasons not a bad thing.
Actually, you will hear stories too of states I believe Saudi Arabia does this, where they will look to see if you have a Jordanian entry stamp, and if you don't have an exit stamp, that almost certainly means you went out through Israel because their border is more open, and there are certain states that won't even let you in if they see that.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So
now, of course, it's easy to get a new passport. You pay a little money, and then it's fine. They just can't see it in the passport, but. There are quite a few states that do that.
Syria doesn't take Israeli passports, and that does not surprise me. Now, you can pass through United Arab Emirates with an Israeli passport.
The UAE has always been a little bit more lenient. I still don't think they recognize Israel, but they've always been a little bit more Western oriented than some of the other states.
Right. Yemen doesn't accept an Israeli passport. Like I said, so, all right. Israel's borders, they're still in dispute today. There's the quote unquote 1967 borders, and then there's the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Now, correct
Yes.
me if I'm wrong, but the UN resolution actually set up for a Palestinian section and an Israeli section.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, you can even go back a little bit further because the original Palestine was Jordan too, and so the original thought, and this was never like official, made official, but the original thought was that what now is Jordan would be the Palestinian state, and then the rest would be Israel. But then that kind of fell apart a little bit, and so when the UN made their official recommendation from this special committee, they said that they were going to divide what was left of Palestine, Jordan is now out of it, into a Jewish state and an Arab state, and they were going to essentially base it on population concentration. Now, this was actually accepted by most of the UN. It was called Resolution 181.
Yes.
But the Jewish population, they actually accepted it as well, but the Arab population, the Arab Palestinians, did not. So that made it technically not legally binding. But that was kind of the push that they would have both an Arab state and a Jewish state in that region.
Right, but because the Palestinians didn't accept it, they went, okay, not binding. But no, the proposed partition was, there was supposed to be 3 parts: an Arab state, a Jewish state, and the city of Jerusalem. And
yes, and the UN would run Jerusalem, essentially.
Well, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, I have my own nickname for it. The most contested piece of real estate on the globe.
It probably is, yeah.
I don't know any other piece of real estate people are willing to start wars over or kill over.
Well, there's 3 different major world religions that all claim that it's a holy site for them.
Right, and not to throw the UN under the bus, but do you know the UNESCO, which decides World Heritage Sites, has said that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is a Muslim holy site, period. It is not related to Judaism whatsoever.
Wow, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously it is a Muslim holy site, but it's also clearly a holy site for Judaism and as well for Christianity.
Oh no, they said it's the 3rd most holy site for Muslims, period. End of sentence. Has nothing to do with Judaism. They don't know why the Jews want it so badly. They don't get it. And I will say
that's kind of an ignorance of history.
No kidding. But because UNESCO recognized Palestine as a state, the United States actually cut off funding to UNESCO and said, you guys are just off your rocker. Yeah, like I said, I did a little bit of my own research. And you can tell where I was focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I understand why the Temple Mount and the Western Wall and I'm Jewish, for anybody who's new to listening, so I will always use the Jewish references, but I understand why this is the most contested piece of real estate on the globe. I get it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I also think that all 3 religions should be able to share it peacefully, but of course then you get people that are just idiots and go, no, we're not going to do that. And it just makes me insane. I mean, in this country, it's not uncommon for, especially when small Jewish congregations are starting out, for them to actually start out in a church, using part of a church. So I don't get why they can't just share it. I really don't. But
yeah, and it's been contested for a very long time.
I don't think I will see that particular piece of real estate's status settled in my lifetime.
It would certainly take a pretty monumental event for that to happen.
No kidding. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just UNESCO, but when I heard that, I actually have the audio. Let me see if I can find the audio clip from. Do you remember the resolution that just recently happened, where the U.S. basically abstained from a vote declaring Israeli settlements illegal?
I saw that.
Well, I happen to have caught a really awesome piece of UN audio. Let me see if I still have it. And this was the Israeli permanent representative to the United Nations. I'm just getting it queued up here. Takes a minute to find those old clips.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Israeli representative was not happy, as you can well imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, he's had two major things happen. Here's the audio.
Just 2 months ago, UNESCO approved an absurd resolution denying the connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. Today, this council, including many of the world's leading democracies, the beacons of liberty, voted to condemn the state of Israel.
I mean, how do you deny Jerusalem and Judaism?
Yeah, I don't know.
But that's why I like throwing in these audio clips, because it shows how history is still a relevant, important thing for people to understand. Because
absolutely. Well, I mean, the Jewish, claim to, the Jerusalem and the Temple Mount goes back centuries, millennia, essentially.
Exactly. In fact, I think this clip actually mentions that. And this is also the Israeli permanent representative to the United Nations.
Tomorrow night, Israel and the entire Jewish community around the world will celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah. Over 2,000 years ago, King Antiochus banished the Jewish people from our temple in Jerusalem and issued decrees trying to sever us from religion and our heritage. But we prevailed. The Jewish people fought back. We regained our independence and relight the menorah candles in the temples. I ask each and every...
that one doesn't relate. But, I mean, you see what I'm saying? How they can say that... UNESCO just has me completely confused as to how they could deny history. To me, that's just as bad as a Holocaust denier.
That certainly is a confusing statement.
Anyway, moving along. So the UN helped Israel get its initial borders, but then Israel was attacked.
Right. Well, right after this resolution was passed, as I said, the Jews kind of accepted it, the Arabs did not, so it wasn't technically legally binding. But this vote in the UN sparked a lot of discontent, and eventually that kind of escalated into a civil war between the Jewish community and the Arab community in that region. And so we saw kind of about a 5-month-long civil war in what was then called Palestine, which saw close to 1,000 casualties on both sides, on each side. And we saw kind of a huge exodus of Arabs from the area, and a lot more immigration of Jews into that area as well. But the civil war lasted about 5 months, and it kind of ended with the May 14th, 1948 announcement by David Ben-Gurion, who basically proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel as kind of their declaration of independence. And to the U.S.'s credit, the U.S. immediately recognized it, as did the Soviet Union. Actually, Stalin recognized Israel immediately as well, and that kind of led directly into another war, which is usually referred to as 1948 Arab-Israel War, which was a longer conflict that involved several of these other Arab states attacking. I think this one lasted about 9 or 10 months. And we had Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, which was at the time called Transjordan. They all marched into the area as kind of a coalition, and it started attacking Israeli forces and Israeli settlements. And it was actually during this war that Israel's borders really started to be more defined. Initially the Arab coalition kind of gained territory, but eventually the tide turned. Israel gained land, and by the time ceasefires were arranged at the end of 1948, Israel had maintained all the land given to it by the UN resolution, and they currently controlled about 60% of the land that was of the proposed Arab state as well, except for, I think, Gaza and the West Bank, which were controlled by Egypt and Jordan, respectively.
Right, and then there was the 1967 debacle.
Yes, so that further changed the land and the territory. And essentially, this was what's often called the 6-Day War. And this time you had Egypt, which was called the United Arab Republic, I believe at the time, Jordan and Syria in particular. They started to amass troops to attack Israel. In particular, Egypt did this. They moved a bunch of troops to the border. Israel saw this as a threat and struck. In particular, they struck the Egyptian Air Force, which was Egypt's strength. Their Air Force was pretty much the strength of their entire military, and they destroyed the Egyptian military. They beat Jordan and Syria. It lasted only a few days, less than a week, and Israel, basically won by a huge margin. I think the casualty count was like a 20-1 margin. And they ended up grabbing more land. They grabbed the West Bank from Jordan, grabbed Golan Heights, Gaza, and they actually held control of the entire Sinai Peninsula as well, which I believe more than tripled the territory that they had before 67.
Which is how we get the current conflict over what Israel's borders really are today.
Right, especially West Bank, Golan Heights, and Gaza. Israel actually did give back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. I think about 15 years later, they officially completed their withdrawal in exchange for kind of a peace deal. But they held on to the West Bank and Gaza and most of the Golan Heights as well. And those are usually the territories that people focus on when there's debate over Israel's borders.
Right. And what I found interesting about the recent resolution, because I actually, when all this came out, right before Christmas with that resolution saying that Israel needs to give back the land it essentially won in the 1967 6-Day War, I actually pulled up the resolution, and in the UN's own resolution that declared, that first kind of put a kibosh on the whole thing, it said that line was not, the line separating the forces was meant to be a demilitarized zone and not meant to be a permanent border and not meant to define a border. It specifically said that in the resolution. And now the UN is trying to say, oh, that's the border. I find it interesting.
It is, and that's usually what you hear referred to when they talk about the 67 border lines. I believe Obama mentioned that a few years ago, the 67 lines, and essentially what they're talking about are the borders pre the 67 war. So when somebody talks about Israel's 67 borders, they're saying without the West Bank, Golan Heights, and Gaza.
Right, and not to focus exclusively on Israel in this show, and we will get back to the rest of the region. But do countries generally just willingly give up land they've won in war, Justin?
I don't want to say it never happens. There are instances in which territory has been ceded in exchange for peace, but it's not that common. It's pretty rare, especially a territory as large as say the Sinai Peninsula, which is larger than the entire state of Israel right now.
Right, but they gave that was negotiated in a proper peace treaty.
Yes.
Not some third party coming in, just like the West did with the Ottoman Empire and chopped it up. Not some third party coming in saying, no, this is what you'll do.
Well, Israel's actually offered to give back the Golan Heights a handful of times to Syria in exchange for a promise of peace, but it's always been rejected. I think they stopped offering in 2010 and basically told Syria, to give up that dream of ever getting it back. But prior to 2010, they actually offered to give it back several times in exchange for peace.
Hey, why would a country say they don't want peace? Isn't that, okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, Justin, but without peace, you constantly have war. And when you constantly have war, you have problems with your economy, problems with your national security, problems with everything. So why wouldn't you want to try and reach peace as quickly as possible? I just don't understand it.
Well, a lot of it's a symbolic nature, I would imagine, at least in this part of the world. You know, you may want peace, but you may think that you're giving up too much to get it. You know, especially if the land that you want has some religious or symbolic significance to you that goes beyond just the material territory. But it's certainly a good question that they have
thinking the Golan
offered
Heights,
certain parts.
I was thinking, the Golan Heights in Syria, why wouldn't they just say, yeah, we'll take it, give those people citizenship, and just let it go? In fact, I saw a documentary, and I'm not sure how reliable it was, but it actually said that the West Bank at one point belonged to Jordan. And the people were not refugees. They actually had citizenship in Jordan. They were given, Jordanian passports, rights, everything under the rule of the Jordanian government. And then the PLO stepped in and said, no, we're displaced refugees. And that not even all of the quote-unquote Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, well, West Bank is what this focused on, in the West Bank even agree with that. They were happy being Jordanian citizens.
Yes, I mean, the West Bank was won in the Six-Day War from Jordan. Prior to that, it was part of Jordan's territory. And there were, obviously, as you mentioned, there were some disagreements about how Jordanian they were. But it was owned by Jordan and part of that country.
What was the point of trying to attack Israel? I don't get it. I mean, it's such a small sliver of land. Why does the Middle East focus on this one little sliver of land? It's less than 1% of the landmass in the globe.
I mean, I think a lot of it just gets back to this religious and symbolic significance. There are certain things that people, I guess, are willing to go to war over, even that go beyond, again, the material ground that they walk on. There's something more inherent to it that they believe is worth fighting for.
Well, I wish it would be solved in my lifetime, but I have a feeling this will be an ongoing issue for many generations.
I would agree. I believe it's something that's not going to be resolved anytime soon.
Many have tried.
Yes, they have.
And they have all failed. So, all right. Now that we've kind of gone through the whole Israel thing, which, like I said, I will admit the borders are still disputed to this day. And I will also say that it wasn't formed like any other country.
It's very unique in its formation, yes.
So let's get back to the rest of the Middle East as we're defining it. And, okay, so the Western powers have carved up and inserted boundaries where there weren't boundaries. And why was, and then after World War II, it was, okay, kick out the colonialists. And then we have the dictators that the dictatorial type regimes that we still see today in many of these places.
Right.
Why do we keep trying to change how they want to live and make them a democracy? I understand it, because the dictators are pretty cruel people in most cases. For the majority of the people, unless you want the Kurds, it tends to more or less at least keep the violence to a minimum.
Well, there is this very strong belief in public policy circles that democracies are inherently more peaceful. It's actually there's actually a very large theory in political science called the democratic peace theory. And it basically says two democracies don't go to war with each other. There's a lot of nuance to it, but essentially that's what it says. And so that idea has really taken hold in the minds of a lot of public policymakers and leaders around the world, particularly those in democracies. And so there's been kind of this push to that if we can just democratize the world, war will, if not go away, it will be minimized. Now, there's a lot of debate in the community about whether or not that's actually true or not, but it's, for whatever reason, it's really taken root in the minds and hearts of these leaders who are making these decisions. And so I think that's why we saw everybody, Bush and Clinton and even Obama now, to an extent, being involved in these dictatorial regimes and trying to help them democratize.
Right. I can see where this would be, where they could say that democracies are more peaceful because, you have dictators like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi that carry out, and I'll throw Bashar al-Assad into that mix, carry out bombing their own people. I mean, to Bashar al-Assad, the biggest terrorist group in his country is not Daesh or ISIS or ISIL, however you want to call them. The people that are trying to behead Westerners and take over the world or bring about the end times or whatever they're up to this week. But the militants, they're trying to depose him of power, so that's why he bombed his own people. And it just makes me look at this part of the world and go, what's with you? I don't understand you.
Well, it's actually something you mentioned a second ago about Democrats being more peaceful. That's actually not true. Theory is that democracies are more peaceful with each other. Democracies are actually not any more peaceful than autocracy when it comes to interstate conflict with autocracies. Democracies are just as warlike as any others. They're just not warlike with each other. And I think that's the key bit that at least public policymakers have latched onto, is that if we can make them a democracy, then we won't fight them anymore, or that sort of thing. The U.S. is by far the most war-prone country in the world. We're involved in more conflicts than anywhere else, and we're a democracy, but we're not involved with other democracies.
Well, with the possible exception of stuff during World War II, if you could call the U.S., if you could call, was Italy, Germany, and... Yeah, and
there are some exceptions to this case, and there's a lot of gray area. And actually, there are a lot of political scientists who nowadays say this democratic peace theory is a load of junk. But whether it is or isn't, that the leaders of our country and other Western countries believe it is. They believe it is true. And they usually manage to dismiss these exceptions, like World War II. They managed to dismiss that and say, Italy wasn't a true democracy, or whatever, whatever excuse they come up with. But essentially, it allows them theoretical justification for moving forward and interfering in other parts of the world to try to democratize them, because they can then say, well, this is good for them too, because it will promote peace between countries around the world.
Fascinating. This, believe it or not, I'm absolutely fascinated. But Justin, can I get you to hold your thoughts for just a minute while we take a commercial break?
Sure.
Thank you.
You can lay down if you wanna. You can run away if you wanna. You can pretend that this is totally okay if you wanna. You can play dead if you wanna. Forget what they said if you wanna. Turn your back on the country needing you right now, but I don't wanna.
In these uncertain economic times, you've got to do whatever you can to save money. One of our biggest expenses can be our cars, especially when unexpected repair bills hit. Not anymore. If you own a vehicle with less than 130,000 miles, is less than 12 years old, has a warranty about to expire, or even no warranty at all, you could stop paying for car repairs. Roadside assistance, towing, and rental coverage are all included. Don't wait for the next repair. Make one free call right now to see if you qualify. If your vehicle is less than 12 years old, has less than 130,000 miles, even if it's out of warranty, paying for car repairs can become a thing of the past. Call us right now and get your car protected before your next repair bill hits. Get protection and no more repair bills. Call 800-696-1030. Again, 800-696-1030. That's 800-696-1030. 800-696-1030. 1030.
All writers are prone to becoming so attached to our characters and stories that we struggle to see why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing to full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, shaping stories into masterpieces that can stand the test of time. Editing services are provided for all genres and all age categories. Services range from the critique of the short story through to line edits on full-length novels. We also offer assistance on generating writers' bios for your websites. We won't abandon you to the masses. We want to celebrate with you in your successes. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services and prices, visit us at blackwolfeditorial.com.
I've owned my company for 14 years now, and I can tell you that payroll is a 4-letter word. I hate doing it. It eats up hours I don't have, and it costs me money I could be saving. But my accountant's too expensive, and I'm not sure who to call, but I know I need help.
We're Paychex, and we take all the hassles out of small business payroll. We save you time and money. It's easy. Call, fax, or give us your payroll information securely online, and we take care of the rest. We calculate the correct taxes, manage payments and direct deposits. We even send out your checks. Payroll doesn't need to be a 4-letter word anymore. We're so sure that we can save you time and money that we'll give you a month's payroll free. Just for calling 877-757-2782. Get 1 month's payroll for free. Call Paychex right now. 877-757-2782. That's 877-757-2782.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Alright, thank you for hanging in there with me over that commercial break. And yes, my wonderful recurring most learned guest, Justin Kinney, is still with us. Justin, I am personally fascinated by all this. So we were discussing...
great. It's certainly a fascinating topic.
We were discussing the Sykes-Picot Agreement and how it created the catastrophe in the Middle East that we have today by just, the Western powers just going, oh, well, this border looks good and that border sounds good. And you had some interesting, how it was pulling in how Israel got their borders and what's going on today. You had some interesting comments about that agreement, too.
Right. Well, so the Sykes-Picot Agreement, as I mentioned, was 1916, so we're talking 100 years ago. But it seems to be fairly influential even to this day, where you have ISIS or Daesh or whatever you want to call them, actually citing that specific agreement multiple times, saying they want to end it and reverse its effects. It's been cited by ISIS documents, by al-Baghdadi himself. So this agreement has persisted for 100 years to the point that you have groups citing it by name that they want to get rid of it, and then ultimately reverse its effects. It's really fascinating how that one agreement has lasted for so long.
Is it common for such international agreements to last for so long?
It can vary all over the place. It's kind of hard to answer that without knowing specific ones. There are some that have lasted a long time, but this is I would say a fairly unique one in the sense of what type of agreement it was, and the fact that you have groups 100 years later still angry and upset about it. Because obviously nobody in ISIS today was even alive or around when most of this was taking place, and yet they're still seeking to end it and reverse the effects of it.
I think it's amazing that, this document has caused, it certainly caused a lot of conflict. It may have done some good as well, but I think that Sykes-Picot agreement was certainly kicking over the hornet's nest, Justin.
It's certainly possible that's exactly what it did. And the problem, of course, now is, what do you do about it? Because you can't really go back on it. Altering borders today is often seen as kind of violating the sanctity of sovereignty. And international sovereignty is a hugely important concept in international relations and in the world. And there's a lot of people that worry that altering borders today will set a very dangerous precedent. Just as an example, that's actually why Kosovo, as an official country, is still largely unrecognized by states that have their own secessionist movements within them. So, say Spain with the Basques, Spain doesn't recognize Kosovo because they believe that their own secessionist movement might see that and it would undermine their authority. The same thing with Russia and the Chechens. China has yet to recognize Kosovo because of their own secessionist movement. And they're really worried about setting some sort of dangerous or disturbing precedent if they started to change borders. Because Kosovo is probably a great example of a case where borders were changed, and a lot of states worry that set a dangerous precedent.
I could see how changing borders in this day and age would be harder. I really can, because it's one of those things of, we've got Russia just tromping all over Ukraine's sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And they just decide, we want Crimea because our naval base is there. Then you've got the Kosovo stuff, and then you've got the Israeli borders that they're sort of borders and are not. It's just not as easy to create a country in this day and age because there are so many established borders and so many established countries.
It's certainly very difficult to create a new country. We haven't seen a new country created in about 6 years or so. There was South Sudan was created, was the most recent one, and frankly they're struggling right now. Before that would have been Kosovo, but you just don't see it very often. And in particular, you don't see it where the borders are just artificially changed. It would have to have come through some sort of war.
Well, when the USSR broke up, that was a huge issue. But thankfully there were many countries contained within it, and they all just got pretty more or less got their own borders back.
They did. And actually that's a really interesting case because of the way Russia divided up those borders. Sorry, not Russia, the Soviet Union. Because when they divided them up, they didn't realize these were ever going to become their own independent states. And so they weren't interested in just making the borders easy. So they were very careful to divide around ethnic groups, which is why if you look at some of those, former Soviet bloc states, their borders are incredibly squiggly. They're all over the place.
Right.
Because when they were divided, when those lines were made, there was no thought to these are going to be their own country. So the border matters. And to this point, there are certain places I think in some of the stands where to go from one town to the next, you have to cross the border 3 times and go through border customs because of just how squiggly they are. But that's because they were divided up before they became states, with their own independence and their own governments. They were all part of the Soviet Union at the time.
Right, and the Soviet Union, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, was one big country. It was a superpower in the 80s and 90s. And well, before then it was, but anyway, it dissolved in what, officially
1991.
Right.
Would have been December.
December 31st, 1991 was when they actually lowered the flag of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and raised the Russian flag that we see today.
Right. And in the process, they ended up splitting a lot of their country apart as well, losing a lot of territory and land.
And then you've got Putin, who's coming along, who I swear, can't prove it, I'm not inside the guy's head, I swear is trying to reconstitute some part of the USSR.
It could be. I'll say it's hard to know what's going on in his head, but it's certainly possible.
I will say he's not the hardest person on the planet to read. That title belongs to the leader I call the lunatic in the North, Kim Jong-un.
He's certainly a challenge.
Yeah. I was watching for news of an ICBM launch during the inauguration.
It certainly wouldn't have surprised me if they had tried to do something to detract from the attention.
No, of course not. Although I swear you could take over that country with a couple thousand pallets of food and rice. You could probably take over the whole country if you really wanted to.
North Korean military is actually considered quite strong. I don't know.
They're considered quite strong, but they're also starved.
Well, the military isn't as much. That would be the average civilian. Kim Jong-un actually does a fairly decent job training his own military, at least to my knowledge. But obviously a lot of their power comes from the fact that they have nuclear weapons as well. You can't do too much because there's always that risk that he's going to launch a nuke. They kind of act as a deterrent.
It does. It really does. Although I've actually read reports in recent years of the soldiers going around begging for food and stealing rice and stealing kernels of corn. And yeah. I'm not so sure you couldn't take over that country with a whole fleet of cargo planes filled with food and a military force to take out the leadership. I am not so sure that one couldn't be settled with loaves of bread, meat, and rice and vegetables. But of course, that would have very much upset China.
Yes, it would have.
So, although our brand new president, Trump, has already annoyed China.
I think he has a tendency to annoy a lot of people.
He definitely has his own take on things. But we'll try and leave the U.S. politics out of it. Yeah,
that's probably best.
We'll just leave it. He has his own way of seeing things.
He does. He absolutely has his own way of seeing things in his own way of speaking. It's not diplomatic. Because he's not a politician. He's a business leader, and he speaks like a businessman in a lot of ways. Doesn't have the diplomacy that you would have of somebody who kind of rose up through the political ranks.
And I think, just to close out the little political section that we slipped in here, I think in part that's why he got elected, because people were tired of the political doublespeak.
They wanted an outsider, and he was the outsider of choice.
They wanted someone, I think, who was going to call a spade and go on from there. But anyway,
at a certain point, they got tired of politicians. Found somebody who wasn't a politician.
He is definitely no politician I know of. He is now.
As of a few hours ago.
He has most certainly been forced into the role of diplomat and politician at this point. It'll be interesting to see how active he is on Twitter.
Oh man, I'm not sure I want to know.
Hey, if nothing else, it'll be very fascinating. And just imagine what they'll say about this in 100 years.
Oh yeah, it's certainly exciting, if nothing else. Very interesting.
As they say, it's news before it's history.
I like that. That's a good quote.
So I don't remember where I got it or who said it, but I've seen it several times. It's news before it's history. Just look at the 1979 Iran Revolution. It didn't change borders, but it changed the entire country.
It did more than that, too. I mean, there's a lot of terror groups nowadays who have ties back to the Iranian Revolution.
And even some diplomats that have ties back to the revolution. In fact,
yes.
Rafsanjani just passed away a few weeks ago.
Oh, did he?
Yes.
I missed that.
Well, I'm a news junkie. And I talk about this stuff every day, Justin. Every day. Ali Akbar Rafsanjani was basically one of the leaders in the theocracy for decades. And he passed away on January 8th, Tehran. I didn't see a cause of death, but he was up there in years, so it could have been anything. He was born in 1934, so yeah, he was often one of the non-hardliners speaking out for Iran to cooperate. So it's going to be interesting to see what Iranian politics happen
Yeah, absolutely. He was quite influential. So
he was extremely influential. Now there's this huge power vacuum, and power vacuums aren't a good thing.
No, I think in that particular area of the world in particular, we've seen just how devastating a power vacuum can be.
Yeah, just look at Libya.
And that's what happened in Iraq too. When Saddam fell, there wasn't a good, strong government put into place, and now we have ISIS. So
yeah, I usually call them Daesh, and here's why. I don't know if I've ever explained this to you. Daesh is the Muslim acronym for them, and they hate it. So I just tend to call them Daesh. My own personal little stab at them.
That's a derogatory term that they believe. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't mind if you call them ISIS or ISIL, but they don't like you to call them Daesh. I'll stick with the derogatory term. I'm not politically correct. And I especially don't care terrorists. And yes, in my mind, ISIS is the definition of terrorist. Don't like what I have to say about them. Back to the Sykes-Picot and ISIS. I mean, they are still screaming from the rafters about this. Now, of course, they've got their hands full, and their propaganda arm hasn't been too active lately. But
right, they've certainly been busy with other concerns. But the Sykes-Picot thing has been part of their mantra that they want to get rid of it for a while now.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think they're going to succeed. I think Western air power will see to, Western military powers will see to that they're not going anywhere, except disbanded, but that their goals just aren't going to come to fruition. Now, there was another point you mentioned off air. What was that other one?
Oh, yes. Well, we talk a lot about how this was devastating for the region, but I want to just kind of talk about what other options they would have had, because all of this said, it's really difficult to know what could have been done better. One large Arab state would have been plagued with a lot of problems of leadership because of so many minority groups. If they divided up into little tiny tribal states, that's not necessarily peaceful either because of sectarian conflicts. And even letting the region sort out their own borders is certainly no guarantee of peace. I mean, the Balkans drew up their own borders, but kept fighting for decades as well. All of this that we've been talking about and how devastating the Sykes-Picot thing was for the region, I want to put a little bit of a caveat on that it's really hard to know what could have been done better instead, just because there weren't a whole lot of great options. And that particular part of the world is plagued with, a lot of minority groups who don't like each other. There's a lot of minorities to deal with. In particular, there's a lot of Muslim sects, but you also have obviously, the Kurds, you have Christian groups, you have the Yazidis, you have all these other little minority groups as well that would likely have seen conflicts anyway. So it's really hard to know whether this Sykes-Picot thing is the ultimate cause, or if it was just a little bit worse than what they could have done better, or if it would have been just as war torn without it, and without being able to experiment, which you obviously can't do. We don't know what would have been otherwise.
Right, and they always say that hindsight is 20/20.
Right, and we can look back today and say, yes, there were a lot of problems with the way they divided it up. But at the same time, there would have been problems with if they divided it up differently, or if they let the region sort out their own borders. So there are certainly costs and benefits to any option that they chose. And while we can look back and say it didn't work out, great for Sykes and Picot, who were the two people it's named for, I don't think I mentioned that. They did the best that they thought they could at the time.
Any last thoughts before we wrap up this episode of Saturday Slowdown?
I don't think so. I think we covered quite a bit today.
Yeah, huge. And I have a feeling this one's going to be a pretty popular episode. One of your other episodes I had you on was my most popular one. And it was the history of terrorism. Great. It is.
Well, it's certainly a topic that's timely today. I think a lot of people want to know about it.
Well, it definitely it's over 2 or 3. It's in the hundreds of downloads and listens. So, and for any of you listening that missed that episode, it is available on iTunes and where most podcasts are found. And you can always go to the KLRN Radio website and look for it there. iTunes, Google Play. It's all over the place. But yeah, so that's why I love having you on, because you bring the historical background into context and explain things from such a different, unique perspective. And I find it fascinating, and evidently so do my listeners.
Great. I'm very glad to hear that.
All right. So where can people find you when you're not here chatting with me, Justin?
It's a great question. I really have 2 avenues you can reach me on. I have a Twitter, which I think is probably the best way. It's just Justin R_Kinney. And then I also, I've mentioned on here before, I'm an author. I have an author page where I write fiction. And so that's J. Robert Kinney. And you can find me on Facebook, and actually I have a Twitter for that as well.
And his book Precipice is amazing.
Thank you. It came out last April. It's been very exciting.
Well, I actually just finished it the other day. I had to put it down for a while because I had some other stuff going on, but it was absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Enjoyed it quite a bit. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at Jessie's POV. You can find me on Facebook at Jessie's POV. And if you've got feedback, comments, or a topic you want to try and see Justin and I hash out on the air and figure out the background of, drop me a line. There's a contact form on the station website. It will reach me. You can shoot me a note on Twitter. You can drop me a line on Facebook. I'm out there. On that note, folks, I think we're out of here today, Justin.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime. Can't wait to have you back.